This is Shari with Lesson 5. Parents are good people to know. We've talked about friends and about you. Now, let's talk about the best friends you have and about your attitude toward them. These friends, of course, are your parents. You may agree with me, or you may be thinking, boy, that girl's a kook if she thinks parents are friends. They're people who make you do things you don't want to do, and they certainly don't understand me. Well, I agree with you that parents can sometimes be peculiar creatures. But let's see if we can understand why parents act the way they do. And then you'll see why I say parents are your best friends. For one thing, truly, your parents constantly think about you, much more than you may realize. They think about your future and about the way the world will be when you grow up. They sort of do your worrying for you. This means that they are doing what they believe is best for you. Now, of course, they aren't perfect. They don't always know for sure what's best. I'm sorry to say it, but they're human. But you can bet that they try to find out what's best for you. You can also be sure that Mom and Dad want you to have a good future, and they know that if you're going to have a good life, you have to build the right kind of life now. Have you ever heard the saying, as the twig is bent, so grows the tree? You may have seen a large tree that had a terribly twisted and ugly trunk. Well, someone probably explained that when the tree was very young, hardly more than a twig, it was bent or broken. Your parents are deeply concerned that you get started off in life so that when you are grown, you will stand straight and tall in body, mind, and spirit. Your parents have a very hard job. They have to give you enough freedom to allow you to learn and to grow, but they have to be careful not to give you so much freedom that you do something to harm yourself. They know that if you form bad habits now, it's much more likely that, like the twig being bent or broken, you'll suffer later. So your parents discipline you to protect you. They do it because they love you, and even when they're angry with you, they love you. For after all, if they didn't care about you, why should they bother to get angry? You see, they know something that is very difficult, perhaps, for you to understand. They know that happiness is a tricky business. A young child may believe that happiness is nothing but eating cake, candy, and ice cream. But you know that if he did, his teeth would decay, he'd get too fat, and he probably would be sick most of the time. That doesn't sound much like happiness, does it? Well, you need to trust your parents. They have learned much from their years of experience, and they want to share with you what they know. They want you to avoid some of the mistakes that they've made or that they've seen others make. What you have to do is try hard to see the love and the concern and perhaps the wisdom in what they tell you. Remember, your parents don't want to hold you down. They want just the opposite. They want to help you to become a free, independent person, able to run your life by yourself as you get older. Among other things, they want to help you to know how to keep from being afraid. Having parents who love you and who look out for you is a treasure, a wonderful thing. It makes you feel comfortable and safe, but there are still times when you're afraid. Being afraid happens to everyone, really, no matter how old he is. But let's see if we can find out how to keep fear from ever being a real problem for you. First of all, you should realize that fear is not necessarily bad. Just think, if it were not for our fear of falling, or of fire, or of other dangerous things, we would probably be so careless that just staying alive would be very difficult. Fear is good for us when it warns us of danger. It's like an alarm or a watchdog that protects us. Now, there's another kind of fear that bothers us most. That fear is the kind that keeps us from doing things that we like to do and need to do because we're afraid of failing or of being embarrassed. That kind of fear does not protect us. It really hurts us. Besides, in most situations, there's usually no real reason to be afraid. Being afraid is just a way of acting that we've kept up. It's a bad habit that we've learned. A very old story will help you to see what I mean. There was once a group of rabbits who were so troubled and frightened by the other animals, they didn't know what to do. As soon as any animal, no matter how harmless, came near, they would scamper off in terror. One day, some running horses scared the rabbits so badly that they decided to drown themselves in a nearby lake, rather than keep on living in such fear. But as they came near the lake, a large number of very frightened frogs plunged into the water to escape the rabbits. Now you can see that there was no reason for either the rabbits or the frogs to be afraid. Many of our fears are just as foolish. But we have to think to know which of our fears are like those of the rabbits and the frogs. Here are some ways to put down fears that hurt instead of help. Number 1, admit that you're afraid. Say to yourself, I am afraid, and then talk to somebody you can trust about your own fear. Parents, friends, scout leaders, or other good listeners would be good persons to talk to. Listen to what they say. They really can be a big help. Number 2, find out why you're afraid. Is there really any danger, or have you just gotten into this rotten habit of being afraid? Number 3, don't be afraid to make some mistakes. Anybody who gets anything done makes mistakes. Don't let a mistake keep you from trying again. Number 4, you need not be afraid if you're well prepared. Sometimes we're afraid we'll fail or be embarrassed only because we really haven't worked to get ready. If you are afraid that your teacher will ask you to work a math problem on the chalkboard and you won't know how, take some extra time to study the math. 5, remember that people are for you. Learn to expect people to be helpful and encouraging. And you know what? They will be. You're not likely to be afraid if you remember just how many people are willing to help you in whatever you do. When you think about the many people all around you who are interested in you, being afraid just doesn't make much sense. If you remember these 5 important points, you'll understand things better when you fail. Now, one of the things that make us most afraid is that we may fail in something we try to do. There's hardly any attitude more important in life than our attitude toward failing. You can be very sure that there will be some situations in your life in which you'll be unsuccessful. You'll fail at some things. Everybody's life is like that. But there are 2 ways to look at failure. You can sit down and quit when you fail, or you can see failure as a step on your road to success. If you take the first approach and quit, then any failure, no matter how small and unimportant, can stop you and keep you from being happy and successful. But if you see a failure as a step that has made you stronger, it becomes an opportunity to learn and to grow. You know, you can admit that you failed without being ashamed and go on to do it better next time. It may help to remember that for every discovery a scientist makes in his laboratory, he may try hundreds or even thousands of experiments which fail. And he sees failure as a stepping stone. And he tries again. You can gain something valuable from these failures. You really can. You can say, well, I failed, but I learned something. I learned how not to do it. And next time I won't make the same mistakes. Failure won't lick me. I will keep on trying until I succeed. Long ago in the land of Greece, there lived a man named Demosthenes. Demosthenes wanted to be a great speech maker, but he stammered. He stammered so badly that every time he tried to speak, he just mumbled. You know what he did? He went off to the seashore, put pebbles from the beach into his mouth, and he practiced speaking against the noise of the waves. And because he kept on trying, because he refused to give up, he conquered his handicap, and Demosthenes became Greece's greatest speaker. We can all learn a lesson from Demosthenes, you know? Your attitude, the way you feel toward fear and failure, determines whether failure defeats you or whether you overcome failure. Again, it's up to you. There are two ways you can look at the world and at yourself. Two persons can face the same problem and see it in opposite ways. If a glass has water in it halfway up, would you say it's half full or half empty? The person who sees it as half full, we might call Mr. Look on the bright side. The one who sees it as half empty is Mr. Look on the dark side. You can be either person. But you'd much rather be Mr. Look on the bright side. He looks for good points in everything. He's almost always happy. He doesn't bother people with his complaining. He sees opportunities everywhere. He looks for good and he finds it. The only real difference in these two persons is in their attitudes, but wow, what a big difference. There's another important attitude we ought to talk about. It has to do with the gift of forgiveness. Think hard. You remember a time when you were angry and you said something to one of your parents that you know you shouldn't have said. Later, when your anger was gone and you thought about what you had said, you were terribly sorry. I mean, you would have given anything if you hadn't said it. But you did, and you had to live with it. If you were not punished, you felt worse. What you felt more than anything else at that moment was that you wanted to be forgiven. You probably struggled with yourself for a while, and finally you got the courage to apologize. Remember how good it felt to be forgiven? That was a real load off your mind, huh? You not only felt relieved, you actually felt that you were a better person afterward. The reason we need to be forgiven is that no matter how sorry we are, we cannot undo some of the bad things we've done. We can't bring back those angry words we said to our parents. We simply have to be forgiven or keep on living with that miserable feeling inside. Of course, if it's important to us to be forgiven, it's also important to forgive others. We all need to work on the kind of attitudes that help us forgive other people. It's also important to learn how to accept forgiveness. You can probably remember a time when a friend hurt you in some way. He apologized, and you forgave him. You hoped that he would accept your forgiveness and not continue to be feeling bad. Only if he can accept your forgiveness, only if he can give up feeling sorry and guilty, can that wall of bad feeling between the two of you be broken down, and only then can you be true friends again. There's an ancient story that teaches us about these two sides of forgiveness. Once there was a king who had a subject who owed him a huge sum of money, about $10 million. The king told the man he would have to go to prison or become a slave unless he paid the debt. Upon hearing this, the man begged the king for mercy. The king felt so sorry for the man that he said, "Okay, I forgive you. We'll forget the debt completely." On his way out of the king's palace, the forgiven man met a neighbor who owed him just $20. He became very angry, and he had the neighbor thrown into prison until he paid the $20. He had been forgiven, but he had not learned to forgive. So when the king heard about what had happened, he quickly had the first man put into prison for life. In the story, the first man didn't deserve the forgiveness by the king. He received forgiveness as a gift, but he was not willing to forgive his neighbor. He could only think, he doesn't deserve it. Well, none of us deserves forgiveness, but all of us needs it sometimes. You will even want to go one step further. When you forgive someone, forget the wrong done you. If a friend hurts you and you forgive him, don't decide later that you're going to blame him after all. The American Indians had a good idea when they forgave one another. They would take a weapon, usually a war axe, and bury it. Be like the Indians. Learn to bury that hatchet. Just keep this truth in mind. When you forgive and forget, do yourself a favor as you do a favor to the person you forgive. Building up in yourself grudges and hate will cut you off from others, and you will be miserable. When you forgive, you free your mind and your spirit for happy, successful living. Not only will you like yourself better, but so will others like you better. To get the most from adventures and growth, you should listen to each lesson once a day for 6 days. So that the tape on your cassette for this lesson will be in the proper position the next time you wish to listen, press the button marked REW on your tape player until all the tape is on the left-hand spindle. You can see the tape through the little window in your cassette. If this is the 6th time for you to listen to this lesson, and if you're ready to proceed to the next lesson, which is on side B of this cassette, press the button marked Fast Forward on your tape player until all the tape is on the right-hand spindle. It will then be in the proper position so that you can turn the cassette over and listen to the next lesson.